they say the quietest woman in the room is usually the one who has already decided. Sarah Whitfield was quiet for 11 months. She made breakfast every morning. She folded laundry. She answered texts with single-word replies that her husband, Patrick, never questioned because he was never really paying attention anyway. She smiled at dinner parties and refilled wine glasses and laughed at the right moments. And the whole time, she was building a door he didn't know existed, and waiting for the right moment to walk through it. Patrick came home on a Thursday night smelling like someone else's shampoo. Not perfume, shampoo. The kind of intimate, domestic detail that cuts deeper than lipstick on a collar ever could. It meant she had been in his shower. It meant it was regular enough to be routine. Sarah was sitting at the kitchen island when he walked in, her hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea she had stopped tasting about 20 minutes earlier. The house was a heritage semi-detached in Westboro, Ottawa. Wide plank floorfurs, crown molding, a bay window that caught the afternoon light in a way that had made her cry the first time she saw it. They had bought it together 4 years ago. She had picked out every piece of furniture. She had painted the guest room herself on a rainy October weekend while Patrick was at a conference in Calgary. He kissed her on the cheek, the way a man does when kissing his wife has become a reflex rather than a choice. "Long day," he said, opening the fridge. She said. That was the last normal sentence of their marriage. Patrick Whitfield was 38 years old and the kind of handsome that had begun to calcify into something harder and more self-aware. He was a senior project manager at a federal infrastructure firm. He wore good suits. He coached a recreational hockey team on Sundays, which gave him an excuse to be gone every weekend morning without it ever seeming suspicious. He was well liked. He was charming. He shook hands with both hands. The woman's name was Denise. She was 26, a junior coordinator, who had started at his office 18 months ago. Sarah hadn't discovered it through a phone or an email. She'd discovered it through a parking receipt. Patrick had come home from what he said was a team dinner and left his jacket on the back of the chair the way he always did. Sarah had picked it up to hang it. She did this automatically, without thinking. The 10,000 small acts of care that accumulate invisibly in a marriage. The receipt had fallen out of the inner pocket. It was from the Andaz Hotel on Slater Street. The date was a Tuesday. There had been no team dinner on a Tuesday. She knew this because she had texted him that night to ask if he wanted her to save him a plate, and he had written back, "Still at the office. Don't wait up." She put the receipt back in the pocket exactly as it had been. She hung up the jacket. She sat back down at the kitchen table. She didn't cry. She felt something cold and exact settle through her like water finding its level. Sarah Whitfield was 32 years old. Before she and Patrick moved to Ottawa, she had spent 7 years working in commercial real estate law in Toronto. She understood contracts, she understood timing, and she understood, with a clarity she had never applied to her personal life before that moment, that the single most important thing she could do was nothing, at least for now. The next morning she called her older sister, Blythe, who lived in Halifax and had a talent for being fiercely practical when everyone around her was falling apart. "Tell me everything," Blythe said. Sarah told her. There was a pause on the line. Then Blythe said, "Okay, don't confront him yet. First, talk to someone, a therapist, a lawyer." The lawyer's name was Ingrid Solberg. She worked out of a slim brick office on Bank Street and had 17 years of family law behind her. She met with Sarah on a Wednesday morning and asked her very calm, very direct questions for 90 minutes. By the end of it, Sarah had a clearer picture of her situation than she had had in 4 years of marriage. The house, which Patrick had always casually referred to as his investment, was registered jointly. But the down payment, $38,000, had come entirely from Sarah's savings, which she had documented carefully in their mortgage application. Their joint account held the bulk of their shared finances, but Sarah had maintained a personal account from before the marriage that Patrick knew about in theory and ignored in practice, the way he ignored most things that were hers. "The thing to understand," Ingrid said, clicking her pen twice, "is that discovery is only valuable if you have time to act on it. Once you confront him, the clock starts. He'll freeze accounts, he'll move money, he'll retain counsel within 48 hours and you will be 3 steps behind from that point forward." "So I wait," Sarah said. "You prepare," Ingrid corrected. The preparation took 4 months. Sarah was meticulous. She had always been meticulous. It was the quality Patrick had once called her greatest flaw when they argued, and her greatest asset when he needed something organized. She began quietly gathering documentation, bank statements, printed and stored in a waterproof folder in the bottom of her gym bag. Photographs of the hotel receipt, taken with her phone, before she placed it back in his pocket. She started a private email account under a name that wasn't hers and began forwarding records to it every few weeks. She hired a private investigator named Harris, a retired RCMP officer with a dry manner and a good reputation, who confirmed within 3 weeks that the Andaz was not an anomaly. She did not fall apart. She wanted to, sometimes. On a Tuesday night in February, she sat in her car in the parking garage of the Rideau Center for 45 minutes because she had started to cry in the elevator and didn't want to do it in public. She called Blythe from the front seat. "I keep thinking about the bay window," she said. "That's the stupid thing I keep coming back to. The bay window." "That's not stupid," Blythe said. "That's what it costs. I painted that guest room by myself." "I know. He went to Calgary. I painted a room he has never once slept in. I thought he would love it." "Sarah." Blythe's voice was quiet and steady. "He doesn't deserve to sleep in it. That was always your room." Sarah wiped her face with the back of her hand. She took a breath. She started the car. In March, she called a realtor she had worked with professionally years earlier, a woman named Doreen who handled residential sales in the Westboro and Wellington West areas. She told Doreen she was considering listing the property later in the spring and wanted to understand current valuations. She did not tell Doreen anything else. Doreen gave her numbers that made her sit down. In April she began moving personal items slowly and without drama. Books, in 2s and 3s, transferred to a storage unit she rented in Nepean. Jewelry her mother had given her, a string of freshwater pearls and a garnet ring, the framed photographs from her side of the family, a hand-stitched quilt that had belonged to her grandmother. Small things. Nothing Patrick would notice, because Patrick had never paid enough attention to her side of the house to notice. The plan coalesced on an evening in late April, while Patrick was at a Sunday hockey game. Sarah stood in the bay window in the morning light, though it was evening and the light was going, and she felt something shift in her chest that was almost like relief. Not quite, but almost. The preliminary stage was finished. The action stage was beginning. She texted Blythe, "I think I'm ready." Blythe texted back, "About time." Patrick came home on the second Saturday in May announcing that he had to go to Vancouver for a work summit. He would be gone Tuesday through Friday. He showed her the itinerary on his phone with the easy confidence of a man who had rehearsed the lie enough times that it had stopped feeling like one. There was, in fact, a summit. Sarah had already verified this online. She had also verified through Harris that Denise had taken Thursday and Friday off work. "Have a good trip," Sarah said. Patrick kissed her forehead. "I always do." He left Tuesday morning at 6. His Uber had barely turned the corner before Sarah was on the phone. The moving company she had arranged was called Whitmore Brothers. 2 actual brothers from Gatineau who were fast, professional, and had been pre-booked for 3 weeks. They arrived at 8. By noon, the living room was empty. By 2 o'clock, the bedroom furniture was wrapped in moving blankets and loaded. The house echoed. Every room felt twice as large without the weight of the life she had been living in it. She kept 3 things of Patrick's: his winter jackets, because it was still Ottawa and it would get cold again; his file box of personal documents, because she was not cruel; and a framed photo of the 2 of them from Banff, because she thought someday he might want it, and she had no interest in being the person who threw away every trace of a person she had once loved. Everything else she designated according to a list she had made 3 months earlier. Good furniture went to consignment. The kitchen appliances she had bought before the marriage went into storage. The guest room, her guest room, the one she had painted on that rainy October weekend, was taken apart last. She sat on the bare floor for a few minutes before she left. Just to mark it. The house was already conditionally sold. Doreen had found a buyer within 10 days of listing it as a quiet off-market property in late April. A couple from the East End, cash offer, flexible on closing. The paperwork had been finalized that morning. The funds, minus the mortgage balance, would clear within 48 hours. Sarah left at 4:30 in the afternoon. She dropped the keys with the neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Mr. Arsenault, who had been told only that she was moving. She loaded the last of her boxes into her car, a used Subaru she had quietly re-registered in her name only 2 weeks earlier. She drove west on the 417. She did not look in the rearview mirror, not once. Patrick landed at Ottawa Airport on Friday evening. He had texted her 3 times that day. Short, easy texts: heading to the gate, flight on time, see you tonight, picking up dinner. She had not replied to any of them, because her phone, the one on their shared plan, was sitting in a kitchen drawer in Westboro. She had been using a new number since Wednesday. He took a cab from the airport. He walked up the front path with his carry-on rolling behind him, and noticed the sold sticker on the real estate sign at the curb before he noticed anything else. He stopped. He stood on the sidewalk for long enough that his neighbor, cycling past, waved at him and he did not wave back. His key did not work. He went around to the back. The back door had a new lock. He pressed his face against the glass of the rear window and saw the kitchen, empty, clean, The overhead light left on. The counter where Sarah always kept her French press was bare. He called her phone. The number he had for her was no longer in service. He called her sister. Blythe answered on the second ring. "Where is she?" Patrick said. It was not quite a question. "She's somewhere you're not," Blythe said pleasantly. "Which I imagine is the general idea." "Blythe, I need to know where my wife is." The house looks like it's sold," Blythe said. "That's the word you're looking for. Sold. The funds are already in her account. Or accounts, I suppose. You'd have to ask her lawyer about the specifics." A brief pause. "Which you now have the number for. Ingrid Solberg, Bank Street. She's very good." "This is insane," Patrick said, his voice dropping into the low register it used when he was working to stay controlled. "She can't just sell a jointly held property without She can if it's listed in her name." Blythe said, "Which it was. You signed some things a while back. During the refinancing. I believe you were in a hurry." Patrick remembered. There had been papers. There were always papers. Sarah handled the administrative side of their finances because she was good at it, and he found it tedious. He had signed a stack of documents the previous autumn without reading them closely. He had been watching a game. He had been in a hurry. "You should call Ingrid," Blythe said not unkindly. "Good night, Patrick." She hung up. Patrick stood in the empty backyard of a house that was no longer his. The May evening was cool in the way Ottawa evenings always are. Spring in the capital is a negotiation, not a gift. He could hear traffic somewhere. A dog barking 2 streets over. The neighbor's porch light came on. He spent the first night at a hotel on the Queensway. He spent the next morning on the phone, bouncing between his own lawyer, the bank, and his firm's HR department, which he called for reasons he couldn't fully articulate except a general sense that someone should be doing something on his behalf. The bank was straightforward and unhelpful. The joint account had been drawn down to a nominal balance 36 hours before he landed. A withdrawal within the legal parameters of joint access, as his own lawyer confirmed, with the particular flatness of someone delivering news they find professionally uninteresting. His personal accounts were untouched. Sarah had taken nothing that wasn't hers to take. That was somehow worse. The real blow came from his firm. He had not known, could not have known, because he had never asked, that Sarah had a professional history with 2 of the senior partners at his office. She had worked with them in her Toronto years, back when everyone was still doing the same circuit of the same conferences. She had reached out to them quietly, through private channels, in late March. She had not made accusations. She had provided documentation. Specifically, a record of firm credit card charges that Harris had helped her trace. Expenses Patrick had submitted under client entertainment that corresponded, date for date, to hotel receipts and restaurant bills that had nothing to do with any client. She hadn't contacted HR. She hadn't filed a complaint. She had simply sent the documentation to 2 people who would know what to do with it, and trusted them to reach their own conclusions. They had. Patrick's access badge stopped working on Monday morning. He stood in the lobby of his building for 12 minutes before someone came down to walk him through the process. The polite, humiliating process of collecting personal items from a desk, while 2 people waited nearby and didn't make eye contact. His company laptop was retained pending a review. His work phone was collected at the door. He drove to Denise's apartment. He had been calling her since Friday and she had answered twice, briefly, and then not at all. He rang the buzzer from the street. No answer. He rang it again. The speaker crackled. "Don't come here," Denise said. Her voice was flat. "I'm on probation pending review. My manager called me yesterday. I don't know what you told people or what she told people, but I am not. I can't be part of this." "I didn't tell anyone anything," Patrick said. "Then she did," Denise said. "And honestly?" A pause. "That's fair." The speaker went silent. Patrick sat in his car for a long time. He looked at himself in the rearview mirror. He hadn't shaved in 3 days. He was wearing the same shirt he had flown home in. He looked, he thought, like a man who had walked into a building that turned out not to have any walls. He hired his own investigator. Not to find Sarah, but because he didn't know what else to do with the particular energy of a man who has been utterly outmaneuvered and cannot accept it yet. The investigator lasted 2 weeks, and filed a brief report that said, essentially, that Sarah Whitfield had relocated and had taken every legal precaution available to her, and that there was nothing actionable for any of the parties concerned. Patrick read the report in his hotel room and then set it on the bedside table, and stared at the ceiling. Sarah was in Prince Edward Island. She had not gone there because it was obvious. She had gone there because she had spent a week on the island with her grandmother when she was 9 years old. And she had never stopped thinking about the red roads and the way the light sat on the water in the evening. It was not a place she had ever mentioned to Patrick. He would not have remembered if she had. She rented a small house outside Charlottetown through a property management company, a converted farmhouse with a deep porch and a wood-burning stove and a garden that had been left to go mostly wild. It was cold in May on the island. She didn't mind. She had good sweaters. Blythe flew out for a long weekend in late May. They sat on the porch in the evenings with mugs of tea, watching the light change over the field. "He's been trying to reach me," Blythe said. "I know, I haven't responded, I know, thank you." Blythe wrapped her hands tighter around her mug. "Are you okay?" "Actually okay, not the version of okay you perform." Sarah looked out at the field. There was a stand of birch trees at the far edge, pale and thin against the sky. She had walked to them every morning since she arrived. She wasn't sure why. They were just trees, but they were her trees in a place that was hers, chosen by her for reasons that had nothing to do with anyone else's idea of where she should be. "I think so," she said. "I'm not happy. But I think happy comes later. Right now I just feel clean." "Clean is good," Blythe said. "Yeah," Sarah said. "Clean is good." There was one thing Patrick didn't know. One final thread that had been quietly wound through the previous 2 years of their marriage, tucked so deep that Sarah herself had tried not to look at it directly. She had gone to a fertility specialist in the year before she found the hotel receipt. They had been trying for a child, not urgently, not with the kind of clinical desperation that overtakes some couples, but trying. The quiet, hoping kind? Patrick had been tested as part of the process. The specialist had told them both, together, in a room with very good lighting, that the results were normal across the board and that there was no medical reason they shouldn't conceive. What the specialist had told Sarah privately, at a follow-up she had attended alone, was more complicated. The results for Patrick had been within a normal range, but at the very low end, the kind of result that a good specialist describes carefully, with probability language, with words like possible but not guaranteed. The specialist had recommended a second round of testing in 6 months to establish a trend. Patrick had declined to return. He was busy. He found the appointments uncomfortable. It was fine, he said. It would happen when it happened. What happened instead was that the hotel receipt fell out of his jacket pocket. Sarah had never told Patrick about the follow-up conversation. She had carried it the way she carried everything that didn't fit into the shape of their life together, quietly, in a pocket of her own, where he never thought to look. She had wanted a child. She had believed, for a time, that wanting it together was enough. After the move, after the island, after the first cool month of building a new version of her own life in a farmhouse with red roads outside the window. She sat down one evening and wrote Patrick a letter, a real one, by hand, on plain paper. She did not send it. She held it for 3 days and then she burned it in the wood stove, watching the paper curl and blacken and go to ash. There was nothing in it she needed him to know. There was nothing in it she needed to hold on to. She had written it for herself, the way people sometimes have to say a thing out loud just to believe they survived it. The letter said, among other things, that she had wanted to be his family. That she had tried to build something real in a house he had never been fully present in. That she understood, now, that loving someone who isn't paying attention is one of the loneliest things a person can do. And that she had finally stopped. There was a morning in June when she walked to the birch trees and stood at the edge of the field, and the light came through the branches at an angle that made everything look like it was made of the same soft material. She stood there for a long time. She was not thinking about Patrick. She was not thinking about Ottawa or the house or the bay window she had loved. She was thinking about what to plant in the garden. She had a whole season ahead of her. The soil was good. She had already bought the seeds.